This brief video will walk you through how to approach the research assignment. Now, I'm giving you this assignment early. You don't have anything due for next week necessarily, but the goal is to have you start thinking about and even working on this paper early, so you're not waiting at the last minute to do what's obviously going to take several weeks to pull together. So again, if we were in a face-to-face class, I would distribute these guidelines and we would go over them as a class. So I want to do that now. This research paper, essentially, the goal is for you to see how an author or poet or playwright's life and times, and notice that I emphasize times because it can just be the context in which they were writing. For example, Susan Glaspell, who wrote the play Trifles, was writing in the early 1900s when women's rights issues had not advanced to a large degree. Women didn't have the right to vote, for example. And so that context definitely informed how she approached her subject matter. So those would be her times, okay? But it can also be something like, if you can find overlap between the poet, playwright, author's life and what he or she wrote. It's usually there somewhere. You can usually find something that inspired what he or she wrote about. So the way that you begin is you pick something that we've read this semester. Now notice that's the emphasis. It's got to be something we've read this semester. It can be the poem that you individually chose for this last poetry analysis paper. So even though we maybe didn't formally study it, you've already worked with it closely and gotten some feedback on the material that you provided. So it can certainly be that poem if you like. And obviously, there's a biographical component to this. You've got to find out something about the author's, poet's, playwright's life and times. And so that I don't have to keep repeating poet, playwright, writer. I'm going to just use the term author, the person who authored the piece, okay? Now, I strongly recommend that you, as much as possible, try to use the GNTC databases. I'm going to show you how to access the information because we know that it's reliable. I hope that one of the things that you studied in English 1101 was how to evaluate material online. But here's the wrong way to go about this. Basically a Google or Safari or Bing search, okay? It may result in what would be considered elevated scholarly material, but it also may not. So for example, a lot of students rely very heavily on resources like eNotes and SparkNotes and Shmoop.com. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And those are really good contextual user-friendly sites that provide information about literature for students studying pieces of literature, but they're written also by students, okay, often, usually at the master's level, but these are students as well who are getting paid to write these pieces, so it's not considered scholarly, all right? And so the emphasis here is on finding information that would be considered somewhat elevated, meaning that you can rely on the sources. And if you find information through the GNTC databases, you do not have to worry about using scholarly works. I mean, whether or not it's scholarly works, because it will be, all right? Or at least it will be of a level that would be considered appropriate for a college level research paper. All right, so please, I hope, if I haven't scared you from just doing a Google search yet, I mean, that's one of my goals in putting this early, because so many students end up, and I won't discover this until reading their drafts, they end up using information that would not be considered appropriate as far as building a credible academic research paper. All right, and I hope it goes without saying, Wikipedia is always a wonderful starting place, but a wiki by definition is a public site. It is edited, and it is edited, but also the contributors are we, the public, and so it's subject to change and often may or may not be reliable. So Wikipedia, if you want to understand something, is a great place to start, but you don't want to build a paper using Wikipedia sources. I have a feeling you probably heard that from English teachers before. Okay. I like to think of this assignment almost as a Venn diagram. If you're familiar with the Venn diagram, there are two circles that intersect. And so one circle would be the author's lifetimes in which he or she wrote, the events, the biographical events in his or her life. The other circle would be the specific work, the poem, the play, the short story that you choose to focus on. And then it's where those two things intersect and overlap. That's what you write about. Okay? So I hope that's somewhat understandable. All right, so looking at these research paper guidelines, okay, in this paper you choose to focus. This is pretty much says what I just said, all right? Now, in this paper you do need to use an MLA. You do need to use MLA citations both in the paper itself and in a works cited page at the end that contains all the bibliographic entries for the sources that you used in your paper. Now, we will have a live session after spring break that will review MLA documentation for those who, if you need a review. In your 1101 course may or may not have taught MLA. At GNTC, we either teach APA documentation formats or MLA. We teach APA often because GNTC is a social sciences school, so that's those are the types of formats that most students would need. But MLA formats apply to literature specifically, Modern Language Association. So those are formats developed for when you are writing about literature. All right, so so we will do a review, but notice that in this folder I have included several resources and links out so that if you get started early, it's sort of a refresher for what those formats look like. So let's look at the specific requirements. This paper should be roughly double your last one, okay? The target is between 1,000 and 1,250 words. A bit longer, even up to 1,500 words is okay, all right? A little bit shorter, 950 or so, okay. If the paper is too short and doesn't meet these requirements, it means you need to do more research. You haven't found enough to say. If it's too long, it means you're not controlling your information, okay? Now, this summarizes what I just said before. The focus of the paper should explore how some element of the author or poet's life and or times influence his or her work. Maybe more than one. It may be a series of events. Now, notice that you need 3 to 5 separate sources in this paper. More than 5 is fine. However many it takes, the bare minimum is 3. Okay, one source should be the work itself, and I'm going to provide links for all of the sources. I'm going to provide those MLA formats for all of the sources that you've read this semester. So whichever one you choose, I'll provide the format for you. I'll just go ahead and do, since we haven't worked with this earlier. Now, one source should be biographical, meaning, about the particular author's life. And finally, at least one other source must be a critical essay. And critical, I hope you understand at this point, does not mean criticizing. Critical simply means something that's looked at carefully, critically, and usually with a scholarly eye. People who actually devote their lives to doing research about different authors. The format's the exact same that we've used in the past with the double spacing and so forth, and the header in the upper left-hand corner. Notice that the title, of course, should not be research paper or the title of the work. You do need to have a clear thesis, and the thesis usually is, what point you want to make about the overlap between the author and his or her work. Notice that you do not need to summarize what happens. There's no need for plot summary, okay? Since I'm your audience for this paper, I already know what's in what you've read. As always, you should refer to the plot, obviously, or to the lines from the poem or lines from the play to make your points. That's always the most effective way to write about literature, but you only want to select that information that helps support your thesis, okay? Again, remember to evaluate your sources, and what that means is that you want to make sure that you're using academically appropriate research to support what you want to say. Okay, I'm going to introduce you in this video to Credo Reference, to the Literary Reference Center, and to the Literature Resource Center in Galileo. I'm also going to introduce you to Primo, which is sort of the library, the GNTC Library's large search engine that covers both the databases and the holdings in the library, the physical holdings like books. Okay, of course we're using MLA. A reminder, don't just directly quote. If you are working with source material, take a look at this guideline. No more than 25% of your information should be directly quoted. No more than 1/4 of your paper should be other people talking. Okay, so you want to reserve direct quotations for those times when what you're saying, either you're quoting from the text itself, or what you're saying from your scholarly source or your biography, you have trouble rewording, or you want to let the authority speak. Okay, does that make sense? So remember that Turnitin gives you that similarity report. It will tell you what percentage of your paper is you and what percentage of your paper is somebody else talking. Now, also a reminder, this is the biggest mistake that students tend to make. There are two big mistakes that students tend to make that lead to unintentional plagiarism. The first one is not putting quotation marks around anytime you lift word for word 5 or more words from an original source. That's got to be contained in quotation marks, and it requires documentation, both an in-text citation and then a bibliographic entry on a works cited page. The second most common form of unintentional plagiarism is students rewording something that they've read but not documenting it. The guideline is, if you did not know before you read it, you have to give credit whether you use your words or their words. It doesn't matter, okay? Because plagiarism is stealing ideas and sentence structures. You know, if you copy what somebody says and just change a word or two around, that's still a form of plagiarism, because you are stealing someone's style, literally. Okay, so I hope you covered this thoroughly in English 1101, but if not, please be aware it's something I'll read for in your drafts. It's very important you not do this at the last minute. It's very important that you get a draft in so that I can give you good feedback and make sure that you're handling your source material accurately. Okay. So again, if you look in the similarity report and you've got something like 40% of your paper is direct, it says 40%, that means you need to go in and take some of the information and rewrite it in your own words. Keep the documentation, but otherwise, I mean, if you think about it, if you've got that a really high percentage of information that's directly quoted, your paper's choppy because it's full of other people's voices, right? So you want to reserve, direct quotations are very important, but you want to use them intentionally. That's the mark of more sophisticated writing. All right. Finally, again, try and keep your style elevated, which means don't overuse contractions. Don't directly address the reader with you, because that's conversational. Avoid abbreviations, cliches, and so forth. Okay. Now, we're introducing the paper this week, the schedule, but notice that really the first draft is not due until April 26th. You have got lots of time, which of course doesn't mean that you should wait very long to get started. As a matter of fact, I just recommend diving in and beginning to collect information just so that you'll be ready to end the semester very strongly. My feedback will be available April 29th. The last day of class is Monday, May 3rd, and that's when the final paper itself is due. If you finish a draft earlier than April 29th and you want me to kind of look at it informally, then feel free to email me a copy, and I will, as I have time, just give you some quick overall feedback. But the formal review process will be this week. Okay, the week of April 2026. So notice you've got a lot of time to do this assignment, but that doesn't mean that you should take a lot of time before you get started. Now I'm going to talk to you about using the GNTC databases. Again, I'm not requiring that you do it, but I am strongly suggesting that you only use information from those resources. A couple of reasons. Again, we know that it's reliable, but the second reason is that the databases provide documentation tools that will actually do your bibliographic formats for you. So you don't have to like try and figure out which format to use and where different pieces of information go. So let me show you these particular resources. Now there is a library tab on our Blackboard homepage, so you can certainly access straight through there. If you ever need login credentials that are the same as your credentials to sign into your Blackboard, to sign into MyGNTC, your email account. Also on the GNTC homepage, www.gntc.edu, under My Resources, this tab here on the left, if you scroll down and select Library, this too will launch the library homepage. Okay, on the library homepage, several ways to access information. Again, Primo, here the tab in the middle, Primo is kind of like the library search engine that will search all the databases as well as all of the holdings. And I'll show you in the physical holdings in the library. And I'll show you how to use that. But that, because it does provide so many returns, it sometimes requires a little bit more digging. So I'm going to suggest that you use Databases A to Z. So we're going to launch this. And notice, of course, it's arranged in alphabetical order. And the first database I want to introduce you to is Credo Reference. So here under C is Credo Reference. Okay? And Credo Reference essentially is like a reference section in a library. If you're familiar with how libraries are set up, there's a section, often very close to the librarians themselves, that contain reference materials that you can't actually check out. You have to use in the library itself. A lot of times those are dictionaries, encyclopedias, that give kind of broad overviews. Credo Reference is a great place to look for biographical information. It's not the only place, but it's a great place. So we're going to start, I'm just going to stick with, say, Susan Glaspell, who wrote Trifles. And you'll notice that what happens is I've gotten, let's see, 61 results. And so anything that is in light blue, will open. That's a link. It's a hyperlink. It'll open. So we've got some information from the Almanac, the Penguin Dictionary of Women, the Cambridge Guide to Theater, the Columbia Encyclopedia, Provincetown Players. So anytime even that she's mentioned, including the work itself. So one way to get sort of an overview, let's see, I'm just gonna choose the first one and see what we've got. Select the title, and then here we've got some short, this is sort of short biographical information. I'm not sure that this would be enough to actually, to actually build a paper from, or at least to find enough about her, but at least this is a start and it gives kind of an overview. Now let's say if I wanted to quote from information from this particular source, notice here at the bottom, and with every database, the documentation tool is found in a different place. So in Credo Reference, it's usually here at the bottom, and the default is APA because they're listed in alphabetical order. I'm going to select MLA, and then all I have to do, here's the correct MLA format for this source. So if I actually use any of this information in my paper, whether I paraphrase it, summarize it, in my own words, or I quote directly, I would need to cite it. Okay, and so I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to highlight it and then hold down Control-C, or of course you can do right-click, and I'm sure you're familiar with how to copy, and select copy. And then normally when I'm doing research, I have online, I have a an open Microsoft Word document where I just cut and paste, information, such as biographical formats. Okay, so this is Credo Reference, and again, with any research, you have to dig. It's really just beginning researchers who try and find the first thing that they come across. That's what they try and use for their source material. You really do have to kind of dig and keep reading, and that's the reason I strongly recommend that you start early. It's not that you won't be able to find information. Most of these the people whom we've covered, they'll have no problem at all finding information. It's just there's so much of it, and to actually find information that you can use may be a challenge. All right, so I've closed the Credo reference page, and I've scrolled down in this listing, and here are two other databases devoted purely to literature: Literature Resource Center, Literature Online Premium. So I'm going to select the second one. Oh, notice Sherman Alexie, he is featured here. Interesting. Okay. And I want to begin by, there's a topic finder, term frequency, but I want to do a person search. And we'll just stick with Susan Glaspell. We know she's American. Let's see what we get. They've changed their interface. I'm actually going to put it up here. And notice that it returns 37 different pieces of literary criticism. We'll look at Susan Glaspell, victimized by misreading. Some of these I don't know. They don't look appropriate. Law, Justice, and Female Revenge. And notice that it mentions trifles here. So this may be a promising article, because once again, what you're looking for are ways that her life and what other people have said about how the work itself and any kind of overlap. And so this might be fruitful. So I'm going to select this. And what it provides, it's actually providing the article itself for me. So I can scroll down through here. Obviously, I'm not interested in what Edith Wharton wrote, but I am interested in trifles, and that's in the second part of this particular article. So I can read through there and see if there's something that works for me. Again, research is always sort of trial and error. You've got to be patient. You may have an idea in mind about what you want to do, but it really requires digging. Okay. Now, notice that the citation tool, our documentation tool, is here in this particular resource center. So I'm going to select Cite, and notice that it automatically defaults to the MLA 8th edition because this is a literary database. So it's assuming that most students would need MLA formatting. And again, you can select it, it'll copy for you, and you can paste it, and there would be my citation. So it's done for you, which again is one of the great benefits of using the databases. All right, so those are just a few options. And finally, I want to show you, we're going to back out here to the library homepage. And I want to show you Primo. Primo, you find it here at the top, you can find it here in the middle. Now, please understand, I'm not requiring that you use these databases. I'm showing you, though, the tools that are available to you that you may not immediately consider. Primo, well, we'll just go ahead and put in Susan Glaspell and see what we come up with. All All right, notice that I got 1,610 results. Now, I can use some of these features here to modify my results. So let's say I only want online, because I'm not going to check a book out or anything. I'm not requiring that you use peer-reviewed journals. What that simply means that's the most authoritative sources, because the information is actually checked before it's ever published, it's vetted by scholars or peers of the people who wrote the information. I want articles. I don't need books. I don't want book chapters necessarily, although there are some online ebooks that may contain good information. Location does not matter to me, and I'm not going to necessarily, I'm not even sure I'm going to check a subject, because that may narrow it too much. And then I'm going to apply those filters. All right, and so notice that we've got an article here celebrating Susan Glaspell, trifles, review of exhibition. You know, a lot of times the title will tell you a lot. I'm going to just check out this particular article. Now notice that full text is available. This is important. Okay, it's peer-reviewed, so we know it's reliable. And then full text is available. I'm going to select this, or you can find the link. You've got lots. You can email this article to yourself. You've got several different options, but full text available. And this is where you can find it. I'm going to select that. And here, abstracts are summaries, okay, and factual information about the show. So this is actually about a different play that she wrote. So this would actually not be helpful to me. Again, you just have to dig, okay. In this particular case, there's a PDF version available. And notes, illustrations about the author, and so forth. All right, so I have to go back and keep digging. Anyway, I hope that gives you some ideas about ways to approach this assignment. You will find that you've probably got more than enough material just in the databases alone. Again, please do not just do a Google search. You may or may not come up with something that's actually would be considered reputable and scholarly. So I really, again, I'm not going to restrict you to just using the GNTC databases, but start there, and if you have trouble, let me know, and I can sort of help you refine your search and make some other suggestions.